I think the word performance has been gentrified, like totally. Okay, so to think about this, like first of all, I think we need to understand like language as something which is fluid, right? Something which is kind of a product, not only just the words and language do not just manifest out of nowhere, but they are part of this ongoing process of creating, reinforcing, and building shared meanings over words, which we can, communicate and express the many, many ideas that encompass any given language. The vocabulary that we have to associate meaning making, and these things are kind of very much influenced by their place in time, right? Like by trends, by major cultural events, mass cultural events in society that revolve around particular ideas, which give weight to certain words and perpetuate meanings and create dominant narratives and connotative meanings that are associated with the essential just sounds, right? Syllables that we speak, that we communicate to each other, that can carry multiple different meanings. So on that level, this is kind of where we can get into the notion of like hermeneutical injustice, and what that means really is just the idea that there is always a privileged position within any given society, um, for meaning making, right? For people to determine ultimately what a word will mean, how we will conceive, how we will approach and understand things under the guise of language, right? Under the ways that we define things, the way that terms and that we can put things that we can put language to, right? At the end of the day, that process, that expansion of what it is that we can name, what it is that we can communicate, is facilitated by people in power, right? Whether that's through like academia, people with higher platforms, higher access to large scale audiences, and that cycle, right, that gets perpetuated, the repeated use of particular words in this space, which become the dominant use of that word, the dominant way in which the dominant meaning, in which those things are solidified when a word becomes solidified in meaning in a culture. And this is kind of where we can see, in terms of hermeneutical injustice, the ways that things such as the English language sort of steal and kind of take from particular dialects within the larger English language. For example, African American vernacular, AEVE. This is how we get the facilitation of language, which begins where meaning begin. The process begins, for instance, just one example. In between, for example, from black women to gay men to white women, and this is sort of the diffusion, right? The path which a word which originates in one place kind of takes its course through society, through these sort of gatekept structures, cultural structures, actual material social structures that exist, which words and meaning must first flow through before they become, well, not incessantly, but ultimately, in the most part, if they are to become a mass scale, cultural term, they must be facilitated. They must go through this process. They must undergo these systems of power and gatekeeping and control before they reach the mainstream and are then when they're made accessible to a larger population. That is, then the meaning becomes changed. The meaning becomes defined in that process of linguistic solidification, the solidification of meaning of words. This is kind of how we have the phenomena of like, for like take for instance, like clock that T, like what that means now is complete has the original meaning, right? The original context in which this phrase, right, these words arose, that kind of that term came from. It's essentially been stripped and is now devoid of its original meaning, right? Of the any kind of bearing, any kind of marking of where that language comes from, what it was originally used for, the function that it once served within communities, within the social circles that it originated in. And now that it has been diffused, now that it has become mainstream and has been essentially gentrified, right, by mainstream media, by kind of people using this word, in particular white people using this word, and not understanding, not recognizing what it is a product of, the time and place and the situation where these things come from. And there's a lack of awareness, a lack of understanding of sort of what that means, the cost that comes to, well, that community in particular. And also, it kind of just cheats us out of all of an unquestioned understanding of how things come to mean what they mean, and why it is that it is easier, right? Why some things have more language, why there's more widely available vocabulary to describe and approach particular concepts under the English language, under this Western, the Western imperialist dialect, which ultimately is it allows for a lot of injustices to occur on this level of meaning making, on this level of exclusion, and ultimately ignorance, right? And kind of an unreconciled relationship with communities that and especially when it comes to cultural production, who have historically been extracted from and marginalized, and not put and not placed in privileged enough positions to be able to determine the larger cultural language, cultural terms, these sorts of things. So we get to the word performative, right? And my point that I want to make here is that what is lost, right? What is lost when a word such as performative has been taken from its origins and then sort of mainstreamized and collapsed into this sort of single viral meaning, right? I think virality is so important to this particular discussion of of performative because um, well, first of all, I think, well, I mean, like, why would this be bad, right? Why, what about the word performance is like so important? Like, because at first it seems it becomes a joke, it becomes ironic, it becomes kind of something to be laughed at, something to be minimized. But I think this is kind of the point: is that the term performance, I think, is actually so important, or so or has been a very a very useful term, I think, in a lot of ways to sort of describe the structures that are in place, which constitute, like, for instance, the performance of race, of gender, and of class, right? That these are all in essence sort of performative roles. I think in past contexts, for example, in terms of like education, where like the difference between performance and actual learning, right? The difference in being able to track students who simply are able to perform well versus students who are actually able to synthesize information, and people who can and interpret that. Like I think the word performance has been such, like, I think even in like I think it honestly is one of the greatest terms that we have for example, for instance, a critique of like neoliberal politics, that like ultimately these sort of signatory actions, these things which liberal politicians will sort of perform, right? They will perform their I don't know, in their acknowledgement of various different things, which they are kind of catering towards an audience, right? They are trying to in essence fake, right, to perform a role for the sake of something. And I think that it's really funny too when you get into this this notion of like, well, when you really get into the semantic definition of performance, what does that even mean? And when you can carry it broadly, almost like, I think it's kind of funny because it's sort of like the main defense that a person has. Like if you, for example, if somebody is accused of being performative, it's like the best response you can sort of have to that question is to be, well, like, well, everything is well, yes, right? Like obviously everything is performative, right? And this is sort of like a it's a again, even this response has been kind of like obnoxious. We've been kind of desensitized to kind of just that process, and the transmission of this meaning as it being sort of like a joke, as something that is not to be taken seriously. And I think that we're like kind of at a lot, like, I think this is fundamentally the issue with um like with hermeneutical injustice, is that it sort of, especially in the mainstream, it disarms our ability to critique systems. It disarms our ability to comprehend injustices, right? Such as such as within language, such as within race, class, gender. How these things sort of construct our identities and actually impact us on the deepest level, right? On the level, like, the world is a stage type shit. Like you are constantly in a cycle of performing parts of your identity which you believe to be true, which you hold within some regard, which you hold as a role which you play in your own head, right? In the ways that we kind of construct our own characters, construct our own narratives, right? Our own connotative meanings about who we are, all this stuff, right? It's super important that we recognize the language that provides us access to understanding these things, access to breaking down systems in the ways that they impact our own self-concept, and the performative nature of being able to identify performance in these spaces. I think is so equally important to being able to critique them and being able to sort of catch them and catch yourself in the act of being performative. But at the same time, then on the flip end, it's like, well, that everything is a performance, that this is the fundamental irony, is like, well, when a person that most embodies the the traits of a performative person, of a performative male, so to speak, it's like, if they really to the T are the definition of this, it's almost like they're essentially unaware. Like, it's like there is a certain naivete which must then be associated with the notion of a performative man, which to which he's like, it is actually more of a natural extent of who they are as a person. That in itself is the highest level of that performance, because they have perfected the role so much to the point at which they are unaware of it, to the point where they don't question, or they don't actually perceive themselves or cast themselves into this network of, what it means, this performative notion of masculinity. And this too is like so important too when it comes to gender, like just the way that these roles have been gendered so much, right? That essentially the stereotypical notion of what it is that we think of when it comes to performative, is this sort of like, now it's a male. Not only is it male centered, but it's also like, kind of, I think the underpinning of this is it's sort of critiqued for its femininity. I would argue, like, I feel like there's a cultural drive to sort of make fun of these things, which, sort of toe the line between gendered norms, but at the same time, then it facilitates this kind of this transitory process of what it means. And then in essence, I think what we are seeing is sort of like a like a gentrification again of things that are, well, I don't want to say are reserved, because I don't think that any particular expression is reserved for a given gender, sexuality, identity expression, however that manifests for you. But like, yeah, just that it becomes so limiting, in that it creates this singular mainstream image of what this is, so much so that we are not able to inspect like our actual positions about these things, our actual interactions with, the colonial beauty standards, Western-centered ideas of masculinity, Western-centric ideas of, gender expression, and how that manifests, in that way. And so I think too, when we think about memetic, okay, in the context of like memetic warfare, which I think has a lot to do actually with linguistics, right? We can look at a number of trends and a number of words which arise specifically from the virality of meme culture, right? And I think that this comes down again to the issue of literacy, right? When we get to the level that like the majority of people these like, if you are not consuming information, if you are not learning language, right? If you don't consume language in a form other than, for instance, social media or digital content, it's like your only exposure, your only connotative meaning to a lot of these words becomes cast solely from the spaces in which you are consuming it. So for a person that is only consuming content on, for example, TikTok or Instagram, as opposed to like, I don't know, reading a book or watching a video essay. Now these things are all subject to the same forms of hermeneutical injustice. I want to be clear, but like, again, this is why the literacy gap is so freaking important, because like, again, if you are only consuming language and consuming words from the market of social media, where things are actively being commodified and are being homogenized and are sort of being slimmed down, it's like you are, there's a large portion there's a large meaning of to things which are lost, and which you are sort of almost creating a false definition out of. It's like your definitions of words and your definitions of concepts will be based solely upon the media in which you consume, and that I think is harmful, right? When we don't recognize where, especially on social media and especially in digital spaces, how controlled those narratives are. How, again, that comes back to the platforming of who has the power, who has the influence, right? Social media influencers, who has the influence to disseminate information about how language ought to be used, and who are the trendsetters in that sense of language. And you are in essence subjecting yourself to this really honestly violent linguistic process, which is at the end of the day will strip any word that it captures bare of its essential meaning, until it has become apolitical, until it has become something which is no longer a threat to the dominant social order. And we can see this too in the sense of, for example, the memes about the influx of anonymous accounts, right? Somehow arising, mostly AI generated, content accounts that appear on social media, which can, if you do your research, maybe could be funded by particular government entities. If you follow the money, follow who, why, for instance, certain AI companies which are mass pumping out content online, who actually is funding these guys, and hey, what is the what's the CIA doing on here? Like why are they paying these people? Um, but again, this my point is like going back to, like, for instance, the Epstein files and the memetic warfare that was widely available, widely visible on social media with AI generated Epstein content, right? It is in essence what it is it's like, um, it is functionally a desensitization of the actual meaning and the actual impact of a word, or of a person, of an idea, of a concept such as Jeffrey Epstein. As infuriating as that ought to be to the general public, it's like when these images become sort of mass produced and reproduced over and over and over again, and you are continually exposed to these things under a particular, very absurd, very like, it's a memetic, it's supposed to be a humorous connotation, right? Something which is meant to be light and not taken serious, and kind of produce it's counter revolutionary. It's against how it is we should actually be internalizing the meanings of words. It's against the, not, I won't say against the function of language, because this is actually just how language functions in general, but like, again, like an awareness of what mass media actually means for the meanings of things, for the images that we typically associate with particular people, particular images and ideas, and how sort of like repetition and the, probably we're not immune to propaganda. Just by merit of us seeing things, we are subject to the influence of simple repetition, simple pattern recognition, right? We fundamentally, we recognize patterns, and we need to be so attuned to the patterns that we notice, and who is creating them, and who is disseminating this information, right? Um, so yeah, so on that level, like, guys, performative, the word performative has been gentrified. It's been mainstreamized. It's been sucked of all of its meaning, of all of its connotative meaning, so much so to the point that we can't even use it anymore. We can't even use it seriously, legitimately, in a sentence, in communicating about anything other than male behavior, male social behavior. Again, like, I just think that's super weird, and I'm sure there are other words. I know that, you know I don't know. There's definitely more clear examples. I think definitely more obvious examples of, where it is words have become co-opted and meaning has been sort of, devoid of what it is. But again, I'm not saying that there is a particular quality about the word performative in particular that we need to get back to, but more so just to point out that, like, we should be aware of these things that, that, yeah, that function like on a mainstream level, that really just function to, like, homogenize language. And I think we need to start to maybe diversify a little bit more our understanding of of actual words before we try to use them. I think too is the big thing. Is like, don't just repeat things that you see online because you don't understand where they come from. I mean, that's wrong on a number of like, that puts you at risk for a number of miscommunications. But I understand that we do this, right? It's sort of like it's a form of cultural exchange, but cultural exchange without, respect, and without actual recognition of, um, where things begin and where they are now. It's like, again, it's just literacy. It's really is just literacy. And the more you can take yourself out of that context, and the context of, in the rapid fire kind of, the streamlined process of how these things basically get accelerated, right, on social media, to commodify language, in the most efficient way, right? That, like, you can, take a step back and really think about it. Really think about it. Like, I don't know. There's probably a lot of other words, a lot of other trends, a lot of other, buzzwords, right? This is kind of like where buzzwords come from. Essentially, it's like the reason buzzwords are buzzwords is because they have been repeated so many times, to the extent that they're devoid of their meaning at any point. They've been disarmed. They've been uncharged, right? They've been uncharged of any kind of connotative meaning which they might have been able to carry, from prior. So yeah, read more books, I don't know, I guess. But yeah, cool.